Hello and welcome to another edition of DCU Daily. It's been a long time. We've actually been taking a bit of a break, kind of just recharging our batteries. But here we are. We're back, and we are back again talking about Supergirl. Go tell your friends. Milly Alcock has been cast in the role of the Woman of Tomorrow in the new DCU. James Gunn has confirmed it on his social media, like literally all of his social media. I think I have read it in at least three places: his Twitter account or X, his threads, and I saw him post about it on Instagram as well. And he even posted it for the Deadline article and the Wrap article, where both of them kind of like put the new story out at the same time, with the Wrap more or less saying that they expect to see Supergirl in the new Superman movie that James Gunn is directing, which would make sense, that if he's the one who's directing the movie and Supergirl is meant to appear in it, that therefore he would be the director to cast for the role, rather than the director who would eventually direct Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, the solo introduction, movie that will feature Supergirl in all her glory. Which it's I guess it's similar to the Zack Snyder situation, where he got to cast all the Justice League characters in BVS, even though they had cameo appearances like beyond the Trinity. And then eventually, even if he had not directed the Justice League movies, some other director would have had to work with his castings. So that's not really confirmed, but we will go into that. But to do all of that and so much more today, because we got so much to talk about, and not only the person who got the role, but also the short list of incredibly talented women who didn't. With me today, of course, we have John. How are you doing today? And how's it been for you recently, following all this news that's coming out?
I was, excited that we got something big for the DCU. It feels like, I don't know, just sometimes it feels like even though only a week has gone by, it feels like, oh, what do you mean we're not getting news every single day about the DCU? What do you mean? But it's like, yeah, there's only so much you can do, I guess. But so I saw this, I got really excited because all three kind of four of the actresses that were considered for Supergirl were all very talented. Milly Alcock was probably my third on the list, only because I don't mean that as you know, I'm not condemning her acting or anything like that. It's just I haven't seen her pretty much her biggest project, which was House of the Dragon. So I'm not a real Game of Thrones fan, so I never saw it, but I'm sure, considering that David Corn Sweat was a fan cast for Superman for a while, Rachel Brosnahan seems like perfect casting for Lois Lane. And from what my family watches, some of my family watches House of the Dragon, and they said that she was really good. And so I trust them. I trust James Gunn that he's done another, great casting decision. So I think she'll be a great job. Would I have preferred Amelia Jones? Absolutely. But, you know, uh, but considering Millie Alcock seems like a great addition for the already very big cast of Superman Legacy, or how it seems, because it hasn't really been confirmed or not whether she is actually appearing. It's just like it seems speculation, but the fact that she is being cast so soon and that Women of Tomorrow isn't happening for a while, it is assumed that she is going to have at least a small cameo in Superman Legacy. And I'm excited because Supergirl definitely needs a proper adaptation, because while she was decent in The Flash, she only had so much to work with. Sasha Cali only had so much to work with, considering it was a Flash movie, although or like a Batman movie, but that's beside the point. And the fact that the show really didn't get the character, it was more like the CW's interpretation of Supergirl, which
Yeah.
I was never really a big fan of.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're aiming that James Gunn knows the character at this point, because he did say, obviously I'm not going to say the entire quote, but he said this is a very different type of Supergirl. Superman was sent to Earth, raised there, but she's been in Argo City. She's been watching like so much terrible stuff for the first 14 years of her life, then comes to Earth. And that interpretation, or at least the more modern interpretation, where it's like she never felt at home on Earth because she wasn't raised here. She's an more of an outsider. She has more of like as James Gunn said, she's more hardcore. She has more of like an anger in her because it's like this isn't her people. And even though Superman would eventually be like, "Hey, you're not of this world either," he was still raised by them, you know?
Yeah.
So that's definitely a lot of people think, "Oh, Supergirl is just Superman, but a girl." No, she's definitely a lot more than that. And I hope, at least starting with Superman Legacy, they really dive into that because it's just so much more interesting to deal with those ideas about, hey, this is a different character, you know? Like I love like diving in like to the moral ideas of like being an even greater outcast, not being of this world, and whether they actually go for Tom King's actual miniseries adaptation or not. I just hope that we really get a Supergirl that is genuinely genuinely the actual character.
Yeah, it's a very different take for somebody who has only seen the TV show or The Flash because, in the eyes of the mainstream audience today, even the version that we got in the animated series back in the early 2000s, I think, which was, maybe a little bit closer to the comic book versions and definitely darker, especially when she starts out initially. She's like struggling with her own identity. She can't really connect. And then, there's a bunch of other things that going on. But yeah, I think whereas for comic book fans who are like yourself and I, like, we are saying, "Oh, hallelujah, we're going in the right direction," and the direction we, I guess, should have, in some ways should have always been going in. For the average person, they're gonna look at this and say, "Whoa, this is very different than what we have seen on screen for the last decade or so," especially because I think, like, the Supergirl TV show, what they did in that show, I think while the show was on CBS, they were going in a more slightly more grounded, like, darker, uh, direction, but then when it moved to the CW, they just, like, threw whatever limitations they had put on themselves out the window, and it became very fantastical very quickly. So I agree with you. I think that with a bigger budget, because we have never had a Supergirl movie, or at least not, in decades, and certainly not with the kind of budget that this movie's gonna get. Like,
Right.
nine-figure, but like, I mean, nine-figure, seven, yeah, nine-figure budget, like $100+ million budget. At that production value, I think you can do things like you can make it a cosmic adventure. You can do a Guardians of the Galaxy esque sort of an adventure. But Supergirl, I'm not saying you make it because it's not going to be a team movie. It's probably not going to be a comedy necessarily, but you can go in that direction and have her sort of like travel, parts of the universe and find her way to Earth. How that's going to fit into the timeline of Superman Legacy, we'll have to see because while the article that we're looking at in Deadline, they sort of said that there's a paragraph in here that if I scroll up a little bit, I can kind of actually, you know what? I think it was on screen here. Yeah, so there's been buzz. This is in the article. It says there's been buzz that the new Supergirl will appear in Gunn's Superman Legacy, which is about to go before the cameras in Georgia, but that's not 100%. Of course, we know that she's going to have her own movie, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, for which we have a writer, Anna Neguera, who in James Gunn's post he mentions, as well as the two of the writers, uh, Bilquis Evely and Tom King. I think Bilquis Evely is the illustrator, Tom King the writer, who's run their closely adapting. So we have like the writing talent and the people who are gonna, I guess, like manage the story there, but we don't have a director cat there yet. So to kind of try to like maybe like solve the mystery a little bit, because again, James Gunn has not confirmed that she's gonna be in Superman Legacy. So even if it is a post credit scene or if it's some kind of other cameo, we don't know yet for sure. And they might want to keep that close to the chest up until the movie comes out, or they might announce it, or we might show up in the trailer, and who knows? Like I guess they they've already got so many superpowered characters in the movie. They wouldn't, if they left out a few in the trailers, I don't think anybody's gonna mind, especially when it comes to surprises. Like even if we get our first look at a Batman, for example. But I feel like there's gonna be a few characters that James Gunn will probably hold off on casting, whose projects have been announced, because he probably doesn't want to like steal everybody's lunch. Like, because I think here, uh, because he's cast Supergirl, I think it's a safe bet to assume she's gonna have some role. in Superman Legacy because you wouldn't, as a director, cast somebody in the role unless it's going to be in one of your projects. Even though James Gunn is like, the creative lead of the whole DCU, he's stated on several occasions that they're only going to cast for like for I think he was talking about it specifically for the Batman movies. Like, hey, do we have something going on for Batman? I think he's even been asked about Booster Gold, and I'm sure several of the other characters. And in each of those situations, he has basically said like, hey, we're not going to cast until we have a director attached. Like the director is the one who's
Right.
gonna like need to do this thing. So if you go by that mantra, like logic would dictate that if that's his approach to DCU in general, then he should be basically applying the same logic here. So unless Supergirl is in Superman Legacy, he wouldn't be casting the character right now. Uh, and that leads me to believe if I was a betting man that we're gonna see Milly Alcock in Superman Legacy in some shape or form, whether it's early in the movie, it's late in the movie, or it's a post-credit sequence. She's gonna show up eventually, and then that might tell us a little bit more about whether Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow as a film is meant to kind of take place before the events of Superman Legacy or after or concurrently. I guess like it could be one of those three. We just don't know yet. Although I did want to ask you, we had just going off the short list that we talked about at this point, it might have been a couple of weeks ago with Millie Alcock, Amelia Jones, and Meg Donnelly. We kind of have an idea of like what's the age range they're going for. They're going for certainly a younger Supergirl who is much younger than Superman, which is comic book accurate, but when it comes down to like in the DCEU prior, the Zack Snyder had always hinted that Supergirl like landed on Earth a long time ago in that ancient crashed Kryptonian ship. And later
Yeah,
on, he was like, she went on to start. That's how they were going to explain who the Amazons were. They were actually these Kryptonians that descended from like that Supergirl ship. Um,
because isn't wasn't there
Very
a
different
comic?
direction.
Wasn't there a comic that Snyder did work on with Goyer and I think someone else that was canon that like Supergirl was like from like the thousands of years ago, and then like she was the one there was like the open pod in Man of Steel, and she was the one that escaped, and she was like a distant
There
ancestor
was
of
a Yeah, you're right, 'cause they had like a what do they call those
a
things? Like a
tie-in comic
tie-in
book.
kinda thing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It got released, like, right around like, I think I might have even purchased a copy. I don't know where the co it where it lives, but they definitely released something around the time the movie came out, and it was a tie-in, and
Yeah.
it was something made specifically for the film. Uh, but I don't think, though, that they specified that it was, like, Kara Zor-El. Like, I don't think that was they
She
just said
was at least of L because she had the crest in the
right.
comic book, but I don't know, I haven't read it, I didn't even know its existence until, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. They're like, "Oh, yeah, there was a prequel comic," and I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." That's 'cause, I mean, I literally just rewatched Man of Steel a couple days ago, and when he's getting the suit for the first time, you do see that open pod, and I think, yeah, the comic was supposed to answer that like that was Kara Zor-El, but the way they changed it was that she was like, I mean, obviously that ship is thousands of years old, so it seems like maybe she was like a very distant ancestor of like in the House of L, I believe. Again, I haven't read the comic, so I don't know,
Yeah.
but it seems like that's what they were going for, which leads to many questions. Considering Sasha Callie's Supergirl, it's like, oh no, Kara Zor-El is actually at the same thing. The
Yeah.
DCEU was built on retcon, so it's like that's like a whole other can of worms, but we don't
Yeah.
like to talk about
No,
that.
well
So
yeah, no,
you know,
it's by the time we got to The Flash, they just didn't really care
they
much. I
didn't
mean,
care.
when the first Aquaman movie came out and I was like, "These Atlanteans look completely different than the Atlanteans we saw in the Justice League movie with, like, how they dress and, like, what the environment looks like." I'm like, at this point, we should just it's a very loosely connected space. So, I don't think and at this point, it doesn't matter, like, that continuity is well and gone. Although I did like the suit, like, that they had in The Flash. I
Yeah,
don't know if I could, like, live with that suit if it, like, ran across a 3-movie story arc and crossovers, but I thought it
it
was for what it
does.
was
I
for
mean,
that
it did look
particular
a little bit
movie.
more cheaply made than the so
Yeah,
messed with, but I just felt it was kinda hilarious that it was just lying on the floor. It wasn't like, locked up to like for
that
testing
was
or
the
anything like
weirdest.
that. And
I
it's
was like,
just
oh,
like,
they
it's
just
just like the
left.
Flash
Like,
literally goes down, grabs it, and fucking yeets out of there. So
yeah,
it's like
uh,
it like wouldn't they be testing on that suit because it's a
right.
suit that's not of this world? Maybe they're like, "Oh, let's try to test on it so we
The
can make something
materials,
for
yeah.
us." But nope, just lying on the floor. Sure, because
I
we
mean,
can't have
I guess the
Supergirl.
Russians weren't very smart about it.
I guess so, and Supergirl, they didn't want her in, like, a hospital gown for the entire movie, I guess, so,
Yeah.
you know.
That moved really quickly. I think they were definitely, I mean, we're getting sidetracked, but, like, in that movie,
Yeah.
they had to cover so much ground that they kinda were like, "You know what? This is good enough. Like, we gotta get to other more important places," such as the fight with Zod and the cringy, like, "What did you do?" Like, the whole, which I'm not blaming the actor. I think that was badly written, and there's only so many ways you can execute that.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, Sasha Cally, like,
yeah.
she tried her best, but, like, there's only so much you could do with that god awful writing, and, would I have liked to see her? Oh, of course, like, like, that's my basis of, like, sure, I might not love all the, like, what the DCEU was built on or Snyder's style, but it's like, I wanna see a vision completed, and,
Yeah.
like, rather than like half or a quarter of a vision.
Yeah.
So I would want to see her, like, honestly, even though I don't think she would have been very good, the Batgirl they got, and now she will never be Batgirl again except in, Warner Brothers vault that nobody has access to, that's essentially deleted from, the archives, and like
Existence. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just not fair. Like, I know life isn't fair, but like, come on, I would
Although,
have liked to
yeah.
see that at some point.
Yeah, it's, like, what was her name? It was is Leslie Grace, right?
Yes, that was her
She's
name,
a
yes.
she Leslie Grace is a fantastic actress. She can sing, she can dance, she can act. Like, she's got it all. Like, she's got it all. And clearly, like, she's done other work that proves her credits, and her filmography is already, pretty good for being pretty early in her career. So I definitely think she'll have plenty of other opportunities, and I think that they would be remiss to, like, not consider her at least for when they do try to cast a Batgirl, because part of it would be, okay, so you don't want to be associated with that whole mess from before, but in this case, I think they managed to, well, if they would probably manage to create enough of a gap between when that whole debacle happened versus whenever. I don't think we're getting a new Batgirl for quite some time to come. Um, that probably gives them enough of a gap to, like, kind of dip their toe back in there and say, like, yeah, you know what, we're just gonna cast her, because I think, like, she would have made a great, Batgirl. I mean, of course, if they're going in a very different direction story wise, that's a different situation. Similar to, like, with this casting with Milly Alcock, like, I don't think they would have gone back and brought back Sasha Calle, because even though that version of Supergirl also was, like, pretty dark, I think they're probably looking at it and thinking, okay, we want to cast somebody who's gonna fit the vision that we have for these set of characters in this new universe. A, and then B, we're looking to cast somebody who's gonna be playing this character for possibly 2 decades. Like, like Marvel Cinematic Universe now, like Mark Ruffalo is and Chris Hemsworth are entering in their second, or if not already well into their second decade of playing their respective characters and their
Yeah,
core Avengers, members. As well as, of course, like, um Hugh Jackman coming back in what is third decade playing the Wolverine. It's insane. Like, so longevity matters. So I think it certainly tells us a good deal that, the short list that they had. Now, speaking of the short list that they had, of course, Meg Donnelly already had some experience voicing the character, so I think that, and then, she has the look, she's got the acting background, so, like, she would have made a great choice, and I think a lot of fans would have liked it because, there's a connection there with the IP, pre-existing connection,
right.
and it was one of the fan castings. But Millie Alcock was, the winner ultimately, and Emilia Jones ended up being the person that we had some controversy around, or I guess it depends on how you take the news, because it was mentioned, I believe, and who was it? Who reported it? Let me see if I can pull it up. I think it was, like, one of the podcasts. It was, like, Insider, the Hot Mic.
The hot mic, yeah.
So, yeah, so, like, it it was in this podcast, you can watch the podcast on YouTube, The Hot Mic. You can search it up, and they're pretty good at what they do. I wouldn't, say take this as rock solid truth. Maybe a few grains of salt is are necessary, but it seems like, according to the hot mic, Emilia Jones refused to read for the role. She was like, I'm not going to read for this role. I've got a resume that speaks for itself, basically, or at least that is the implication. That's what we can take away from it.
Right.
And of the three, who were shortlisted, to me, that reminds me of that situation that James, Cameron brought up when he was promoting Avatar: The Way of Water. And he was talking about, and this is, I think it came out in this long interview that he did for the promotion of the movie, not even when it was coming out, but I think it was when it was about to come out on Blu-ray and digital. And so I think it was like spring of last year that I first found this, and he talks about it, not only Avatar, but he's talking about Titanic. So and he tells the story of Leonardo DiCaprio walking in to basically audition for the role, and he refused to read. He was like, "Well, I'm not gonna read." Like, DiCaprio at the time was like the teenage heartthrob. He was huge, like with an we had a huge following already. So he was like, "I'm here. You want to cast me? Here I am." Like, just like, but I'm not gonna read. And James Cameron's response to him, well, then I can't cast you. Like, I think we're done here because like this movie is gonna take up 2 years of my life, and like I want, so we gotta do this because I need to be sure that you're
Right.
gonna be able to pull this off. Like you can't just play if you I need to know if you can play Jack and if the screen chemistry is gonna work and all that stuff. And so you need to read. And the decision that DiCaprio made was he decided to read for the role, and the rest, as they say, is history. And we thankfully don't know what would have happened otherwise. I mean, could have been a better situation. Could they have found a better actor? Maybe. Who knows? But certainly,
Although, I mean, like with
uh,
Leo DiCaprio, I can kind of see it. I mean, his work on Critters 3 definitely spoke for itself. I mean, come on, you got to James
yeah,
Cameron should have at least considered that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I'm not saying like
Nah, I'm just
it
kidding
was
around.
bulletproof, right? Like, but it felt like in the moment, like as an actor, you make that decision, and you say, all right, you know what? Like I'm no different than anybody else auditioning here, and I'm just gonna reach for it. Like no
Yeah,
matter how big, like and I think it's the professional thing to do. Now, again, we are kind of speculating a lot as to what exactly happened because
right.
we don't get a lot of details from this, report that we got from in the Hot Mic podcast. And it just says that she refused to read. She was, 2 out of the 3 read, and then she was the one who didn't. And I mean, I loved her in Coda. I think Emilia Jones is a fantastic actress. She's got a bright future. She's already done a bunch of great stuff. She's already been in an Oscar-winning film. So, the only good things are ahead for her probably. And then we're not sure though, as far as the details of what exactly happened, whether it was a representation-driven decision, because that does happen sometimes in Hollywood, or whether it was her personal decision to not reach for it, but even if that was the case, we don't know what the motivation behind it was, like why she said that, and we can only speculate because the first reason that comes to mind is like she's like, yeah, I'm too good to read, like just give me the role, like if you brought me in and this far and you considered me for the role, then just give it to me. And I recently actually was reading an article on the other hand in Deadline where they were reporting that James Gunn, when they were first looking to cast for Supergirl, the first name he suggested was Milly Alcock. So it's ironic that they ended up going with her for the role in the
Yeah.
end. After going through, I mean, the short list that we've been talking about had 3 names on it, but I'm sure they started with a much longer list and they narrowed it down to that. Like you mentioned, there was a few other. Was it Kaylee Spaney was also at some point in
Yeah,
consideration?
she
So
played Priscilla Presley in Priscilla, the Sofia Coppola movie that just came out. Yeah, but she wasn't. I know there was the three, Jones, Alcock, and Donnelly. That was the one that was being reported on, but also Kaylee Spaney. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
yeah,
Um, was also on the short list, but she wasn't reported on as much. But yeah, she was on the short list for Supergirl as well. Um, but yeah, I think all four of them could have done, or at least the three that weren't cast could have done a good job. Like again, I'm more familiar with Jones and Donnelly because I've seen a little bit of Coda. Haven't seen the whole thing, but I loved Emilian Jones on Lock and Key. That show is really good. I think it just ended. I have yet to watch season 3, the final season, but she was really good on that. She definitely had sort of like kind of that perfect Supergirl vibe of like where she can be like kind of like that sort of general like teenage vibe of like that modern teenage vibe, but also can have like a lot of like anger in her. Like there was a lot of stuff that I don't want to spoil it, but there was a lot of stuff in like season 1 of Lock and Key where it like bought into like that sort of like kind of angry at the world kind of thing that Supergirl has. And then with Meg Donnelly, obviously she voices the character. I've seen Legion of Superheroes, and that not the best of the Tomorrowverse, but she did a pretty good job in that. I have seen bits and pieces of Zombies, and less said about that, the better. But I think she still could have done that in a live action sense. Obviously, voice acting and live action acting are two very different beasts, but I still think she definitely had the look for it, and she definitely could have been like a physically good choice for the role. It just Millie Alcock. I have full faith in her. I think she'll do a fantastic job. Hopefully, I'm not proven wrong, but I think again, as I said before, with how much casting we've seen for all these characters that have been cast, so I
Yeah.
think all that. So yeah,
I mean, it's yeah, and at the end of the day, I think from when I read that story, the whole James Gunn like first name he pitched was Milly Alcock. I'm like, there might have been a pre-existing bias there a little bit, but then again, like James Gunn as a filmmaker knows what he's looking for, and as a lot of filmmakers do, so he probably was like, she's a great fit. And then like they go through the whole process anyways. Like he's not obviously
yeah,
just handing her the role. Millie Alcock still had to earn her way into it. And of course, all the three of the actresses have had great resumes doing DC stuff or otherwise. So moving forward, I think whoever they would have landed upon, they would have made a good choice.
yeah.
So and now it's up to Millie to kind of like make the best of it. Now we did get a comment in our live chat on YouTube, and Hunter Igi was asking, what character do you see Meg Donnelly, if James Gunn did cast her in the DCU, but of course not a Supergirl, but like what other character do you think would work? Livewire, Stephanie Brown, like who, or maybe somebody else? Like what do you think, John? If Meg Donnelly ended up in the DCU playing some other character, what character would you like for that to be?
There is a load of different characters. I mean, Stephanie Brown could be good. It's just I feel like ironically, I think Amelia Jones would fit Stephanie Brown more because she kind of has that like anger in her because her dad is a supervillain. So, I think she would fit there. I don't think Meg Donnelly. I think Meg Donnelly would fit more into someone who could do like I don't want to say like cutesy. That's kind of diminishing her a bit. But like someone like more into like someone who can do like a like more of that like modern teenager vibe or young adult vibe. Um the only one that's coming to mind is Miss Martian, although that's that would be like very different because someone who's like genuinely like a big outcast of because she's an alien and all that. But I think yeah, the only one that's coming to mind is Miss Martian, although she's a redhead, not a blonde. But yeah, that's the only one that's really coming to mind. Like usually again when I think we mentioned this somewhere else when you're put on the spot, um, can't really think of anything. But yeah, that's the only one. Um, you know, I did think of another one. I think she would be really good. Again, I'm kind of basing more off of her performance in Zombies. I didn't watch the whole thing. I've just seen a lot of it, but I think she could be a good Starfire. Like she kind of has more of that like innocent vibe of like someone who again, kind of like what the CW Supergirl was where it's sort of like that modern young woman with superpowers rather than what Supergirl actually
Yeah.
is.
What about even like Star Girl? I mean, I don't know if they're gonna go in that direction with those set of characters, but like a DCU version of Star Girl.
I don't know. Like Breck Basinger was so good that like I can't see anybody else in the role. I mean, I'm sure
That's
I would
fair. I'm just speculating, you know, like because if I'm
I think she might be a
yeah,
tad too old. I would want someone who at least looks a little bit younger because she is supposed to be like a teenager, like a young like
yeah.
someone actually in high school. So I think someone who would fit that vibe could be I think she could do it. I think she could definitely do Stargirl, like a slightly older version of Stargirl. But yeah, Starfire is definitely the one that could be good for McDonnell. That's definitely the one that like I definitely envision that very well, and I think she could definitely fit that role very well. Although it is kind of funny how I don't know what are you grabbing photos of because she was
she's done she was in like a sitcom for I think it was on ABC, I think.
yeah, because is that Diedrich Bader? Because that would be funny. Because not only does she, you have the voice
Oh,
of Supergirl.
she was an American housewife. She like plays the daughter in the family.
Um, because I think that's Diedrich Bader who famously played Batman in Batman Brave and the Bold, one of the best Batman voices ever. So, I think that's kind of amusing if that's the case.
Yeah,
Um, but
I
but yeah, I think Starfire because like Starfire, like you got to find that like right balance. Like even though Teen Titans was a great show, I think like some people have a problem with Starfire being like too innocent and naive. So I think yeah, like you got to have that balance of like someone who's like an slightly unaware alien, maybe someone who's maybe not unaware, but like someone who's like more honest, like doesn't know like the social conventions of Earth, like someone uh like that scene, I think it was in the DCAMU Judas Contract movie where she was like where they were like talking about like moves and Starfire was like, "Oh, like the moves you showed me last night, Dick." And she's like, "Corey, don't talk about that." And and like something like that who's like not
yeah.
understanding of like Earth's like
Mhm.
social conventions, like rather than someone who's like an idiot, like that the Starfire on the Teen Titans animated show could be seen as. I know she's not, but like that's someone who doesn't get the character can see her as. So like you would have to get someone who like could like ride that line of like, oh no, she's not actually an idiot. She just like doesn't understand like what how we have like what we are as a society. Like I think she could definitely do that from what little I've seen of her. I think McDonnelly could do that very well. And then Amelia Jones, she could play spoiler. I wouldn't mind her as spoiler
Okay,
because I
so
think
we
I
were
know I
getting
keep
it.
going on and on, but like
Yeah, so
I get so excited about fan casting. That's like my bread and butter. So I'll shut up
and
now.
no, but you have some good suggestions, and I don't know if you saw on the YouTube chat they were suggesting possibly Green Arrow's daughter or even Artemis Tigress. I don't know if did you mention one of those already, but
No, but she might be a little bit too old for Artemis. Again, I would want someone who's like riding the line of like 18, 19, maybe
but
someone
the
even
thing is,
younger
like,
than
I
that.
feel
But
like
like
you can get away with that, no? Like, because I feel
I'm just curious how old Meg Dom is because I don't want to assume anything and then be like, oh no, she's actually this age the whole time. So she's
yeah.
about 23 years old. She's pretty the same age as Milly Alcock. So I think you could probably get because Meg Donnelly definitely looks the youngest out of the three. So I think you could probably get away with that. I could definitely see her as Artemis Croc, not Green Arrow's daughter, as a lot of people think she is. She is not. And then, but you also have Mia Dearden, who's was the second Speedy, I believe, after Roy Harper, if I remember that correctly. Um, but yeah, like someone who could be like Young Justice, Teen Titans, kind of like you got to think in like that vein of like younger, like or like younger Bat family sort of thing. Like there's just like like I feel like you could go on and on about like so many different characters, but like I feel like a good place to start. That's why I said Starfire because I was thinking of like, okay, Teen Titans, who would be good? And it's like you would have, like, and then kind of branch off from there. That's because I was thinking of like Miss Martian, because I was thinking of
Yeah.
or like the animated Young Justice rather than the comic because the comic is different. But you have like, yeah, like Teen Titans, Young Justice, younger version of the Justice Society because Stargirl, that's where she's from, and then you also have the Yolanda Montez with Wildcat and like going off from there. So like as long as you're like kind of thinking in that area, I feel like she could fit into a lot of those. She could fit into a lot of those characters. I don't know, some like and then I know Millie Bobby Brown was like the favorite for like Raven because 11 is so much like Raven as a character. So like you could definitely I feel like in
I
terms
mean,
of
look,
young
I
actors, just
I thought they cast Raven quite well in Titans. That was probably my favorite casting in that whole
yeah,
show.
Tegan Croft was very good. I mean, the show wasn't
Um,
good, but she was good.
yeah, no, exactly. I think like she was probably the one of the few parts of the show that stood out, and certainly I thought it was probably the most inspired casting in the whole show. But as far as like just kind of the point I was trying to make earlier, I'm like, okay, so Millie Alcock played Rhaenyra in House of the Dragon, and in like that infamous episode four, well, the first four episodes, and basically the entire time she's playing the character, she's meant to be like 18 years old, like she's meant to be a teenager, and
Right.
obviously in real life she's in her 20s. As are all of these, these three actresses who were in the final shortlist for the role. So I was just saying, I'm like, if you want to cast a character whose age is meant to be like a teenager, they're all kind of in that range where they can pull it off. Like like in Hollywood, you always tend to go for a little older to play somebody that character that's a bit younger. So I think there's just enough there. um, it would depend on obviously, like, I think more a matter of story and how much, how good a fit they think the
Right.
actors are. But I do wonder, like, do you have I don't because it's so early still, like, the DCU hasn't put out a single project yet, so I do wonder if we have already seen an instance where they have cast somebody in a role after having passed on them for a role previously. I don't think that's happened yet, right? Like, I mean, even Nathan Fillion, like, he played a role in the Suicide Squad, which is not part of the DCU, and James Gunn has worked with him on so many different things, including the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So that's not the same thing when he gets cast in Superman Legacy, but because I'm wondering, like, maybe somebody that passed over for Lois Lane, or because that's the thing, like, once you get past the who did we actually cast, you wonder who we can what character the people that didn't get the role can go play. And I don't know if you've gone that far yet. Like, I feel like they're still sort of at that point where they're just doing a fresh search for these different roles. But not that doesn't mean it can't happen. Like, there was that famous story of how, we got our Loki. Tom Hiddleston, there's footage that a lot of people have seen where he's auditioning for Thor, and then Chris Hemsworth gets the role and he gets, Tom Hiddleston gets Loki. And again, the rest is history. That, people
I
can't
mean, yeah.
imagine somebody else playing Loki today. So it could certainly be the case that they could pass over somebody and for all we know, that might have already happened. We just don't know yet because we only got, like, for Supergirl we got the short list. I know we had a short list for Superman and Lois Lane, but that doesn't mean we have gotten the whole short list unless they narrowed it down to just three. Maybe they have top five and they only know about the three of the top five. Maybe they had a longer list at some point. So like there may have been instances where they had somebody in consideration for one role, then moved them over to a different role. We'll probably find out in the coming years. But just going back to the main story, of course, Milly Alcock now we know is going to be playing the role of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and James Gunn confirmed this on his threads and all, like I said, all those social media accounts. And so there, he has made it official, but he didn't specify whether she's going to show up in Superman Legacy. But the rap clearly has inferred that that's going to happen, which I mentioned earlier that if James Gunn as a director is casting her, then that's most likely because it's in one of his projects. And right now, of course, he's working on Superman Legacy. So if you were to connect the dots, 2 + 2 = 4, and it's a safe bet. But I wanted to ask before we finish up what your thoughts are in terms of Supergirl showing up in Superman Legacy. But not only that, where would you place her in the movie? Like, do you think she's making a cameo? Do you think she's somehow integrated into the story? or do you think she's just gonna pop up in a post-credit scene? And then also, as an extension of that, how do you think that connects into her solo outing that's gonna come up in hopefully a couple of years or sooner? Because they've already got a script in mind and a writer there. We're just missing a director, or at least officially we're missing a director. They might have got one, but it's just not official yet. But I was wondering, like, would that make that movie a prequel to Superman Legacy? It would run concurrent to Superman Legacy, or the events would take place after the events of Superman Legacy? So just give me your sense of how do you see Supergirl integrating into the DCU continuity based on this casting decision?
So I would, if I were to take a guess, I would like maybe, because we know the origin of Superman at this point. I would say maybe they'll do like a quick like flashback of like kind of like what All Star Superman did, where it's like dead planet, rocketed to Earth, Kansas, boom, here we go. Just because we know all that. Superman and Lois, they did 5 minutes of the flashback sequence, and boom, that's all we needed. So I could kind of see her in two instances. I could see them like doing a super quick flashback sequence instead of, like Man of Steel, where it was like a 20-minute sequence on Krypton. Have it be like 3 to 5 minutes where we like maybe see her for like a little bit, like she's the one like helping Kal-El into the rocket ship and then blasting him off and that kind of thing, and like seeing like waving goodbye, that kind of thing. And then we like see her and her family, Allura and Zor-El, being we see like Superman rocketing off, and then we see like Argo City kind of getting cracked off and like going off into space. And like, I don't know how like Argo City like works. I'm more familiar with the modern version of Supergirl's origins rather than the Argo City version. So maybe like Argo City gets like cracked off and like kind of sent off, and then before Krypton explodes and that kind of thing. So like, and then that's it. And then that's all we see of her. We don't see anything else. And then another way I could see it is in a post-credit scene, and it's just like we see Argo City, something happens on Argo City and she has to leave, which leads to her solo film. Because I don't know, again, I don't know the Tom King Woman of Tomorrow miniseries, so I don't know how like that starts. But either of those I could see like at the very beginning or at the very end slash post credit scene. I could definitely see those. I think because those would be preferable. I wouldn't want to see her as like a major part, because again, we have so many of these characters that are at least going to play a decent role in the movie, like Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, Hawk Girl. I feel like having this much of a big character, I feel like James Gunn is just going to have her in a quick sequence and then just have her really be in her solo feature, and then that's where she's going to be in the focus.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think that might, because then it kind of starts to well, at least in my head, with the way they've described the Supergirl movie so far, or at least what I've inferred based on their description. It feels like they've made it at least seem like that Supergirl movie is going to be almost like a journey to Earth for Supergirl kind of a film. That we don't start off with her on Earth, that she gets to Earth at some point in the movie. And if that's the case, then I mean, like you said, they could kind of show something happening on this other, so whether it's Argo City or wherever it is. Um, and that would make sense as like you attach that on as a post credit sequence. I feel like James Gunn might be looking to integrate her into the story a little more closely than that. Like
Mm.
maybe it's more it's attached narratively much more closely than that. And given that we're gonna have the engineer, we're gonna have all these other Justice League or Justice Society esque, or even the Terrifics, and like all these characters in this movie, we're gonna have a pretty expansive plot. It seems like Superman is gonna be dealing with a lot of other, super characters, as well as, of course, his own. family of characters that we're more familiar with. I want to believe, and I think at least in my opinion, a safe bet that what we're gonna see with Supergirl in this movie will be events that take place after the events of Supergirl, Women of Tomorrow. That Supergirl is already gonna be on Earth and somehow engage, or it's gonna be sort of like we have this cosmic adventure in Thor Ragnarok, and then we something happens at the beginning of Infinity War that then finally brings Thor to Earth. Um, that could be the way they go maybe with it, but, like, the order in which the movies come out would be obviously reversed. Or maybe a better analogy would be like, they did a Wonder Woman shows up and debuts in Batman versus Superman, but then we get, thrown back into World War One and get this big adventure with her. Um, that's just my interpretation based on what we have seen so far. Um, but, it's up in the air. Nobody really like, I don't think I've seen anything from, like, Ana Negreira, like, she hasn't really given up anything regarding the script. Of course,
No,
as a writer, you generally are not gonna get a lot of interviews. I'm sure she's been asked questions
yeah,
on social, but,
nobody cares
you
about the
gotta.
writer.
Yeah, yeah, but, like, given that she is an actress, or, she's a higher profile writer in terms of, like, people having a general knowledge of, like, this person exists, like, most people don't know who writes a lot of these movies, especially, like, at these tentpoles, right? And that's almost by design, something in some cases, and in certain cases is because they're just not as, highly billed or regarded when the movie comes out and does well. But as far as Ana Negreira goes, I'm sure she's been asked about it, and she's probably just, and you can't talk about it and until the movie comes out, and chances are that script, even though they've got a script, is probably still not in its final, version. It's not anywhere near ready to go into production, and that at least has something to do with the fact that they don't have a director attached. Because I'm sure when the director comes in, they're not gonna say do the whole thing over again, because although that could happen, a lot of times you bring a director and they're like, great script, but not my script. We're going in a different direction. That could happen, but
Yeah,
I feel like James Gunn wouldn't necessarily do that, considering that that would mean, okay, you're starting from scratch. Like, they had to do that like 4 times with the Flash, and now you push back the release of the movie by however many years. And I don't think they want to do that for the DCU, and I certainly hope they don't, because I don't want to wait like 5-6 years for the Supergirl movie anyway. So I'm guessing whoever they bring on to direct is going to largely take the script that's already in place, and maybe with some tweaks get it to the point where, the director likes what they have. But having said that, Milly Alcock is on board, and you've got the writer, you've got James Gunn there. Even if one of our viewers suggested that James Gunn could possibly take it on as a movie, I don't think that's likely to happen, because he's already doing Peacemaker season 2. He's gonna be involved in Waller. He's obviously directing Superman Legacy. He's already, the creative lead of all of this. He's got a lot on his plate, and the last thing you want to do, and plus it's also a matter of, like, I think he's going to pick and choose and direct only certain things where he either really loves working on that project, has a pre-existing connection to those characters, aka Peacemaker and Waller, um or he's just going to, otherwise pass it off. And he should delegate, like, as a leader and basically the creative lead of the DC studios. You don't want to build a reputation that you're directing every movie in this franchise. You don't, because at that point we might, and because people are going to start saying, well, how is this different from Zack Snyder directing all of those movies, and then you guys yanking him away? Like, it's, you don't like the vision, especially if some of these movies like struggle at the box office and their reception with the audiences and critics aren't very well. People are going to immediately start drawing comparisons. So I think diversifying, like, the number of creative voices that you have in the fold, especially in the director's chair, matters a lot. And obviously, we already have Andy Muschietti involved. I'm sure James Wan is going to do something with them. I doubt there's not a project they've already got in mind for him to work on, whether it's Aquaman related or something else. Maybe it's Lobo. He's already got work with Jason Momoa quite a bit, and then of course they've got James Mangold. So yeah, those are my thoughts on, like, as far as the director for the
yeah.
movie. Last question for you though: timeline. We have a lot of pieces in place. Can you infer anything further than what we've already discussed in the past about when Supergirl might hit theaters? I mean, suppose they get a director and they get a script. What's the soonest that we get to see this movie?
I feel like, again, yeah, we have talked about this before. I feel like, yeah, Superman Legacy is going to come out in 2025, and then after that is who knows. I feel like it does depend on Superman Legacy a little bit because I think we're getting a lot of pieces. Um, because I know the order is, at least the order which Gunn announced all these movies, was Legacy, Authority, Brave and the Bold, Supergirl, Swamp Thing. But here's the thing: we have a director for Brave and the Bold, and we have a director who is also the writer for Swamp Thing. So it feels like that Swamp Thing would come next because there's more pieces to that, and then the next would be Brave and the Bold because he's working on his It show, and we don't have a writer yet. Meanwhile, Supergirl, I feel like would maybe be after Batman, or like maybe right before Batman because we only have a writer. So, and we don't have anybody for the Authority. So it is kind of like a bit of a weird thing. I would say, if I were to guess, I would say the earliest would probably be 2027, only because I feel like they would do a Superman movie. They would, the next year after, they wouldn't want to do another super movie, even though Supergirl is a very different character. Obviously, because people, general audiences would be like, "Oh, Superman, Supergirl, same character. Who cares?"
Especially if she makes an appearance in Superman Legacy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel like at the very least it would be 2027, whether they're going one movie a year or even two movies a year.
I think they said
Um,
their goal is 2 movies, 2 shows a year, but they might
yeah.
not get there for a few years.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
even then I think Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow would probably come out, if I were to guess, in 2027, while I think Swamp Thing and Brave and the Bold would maybe come out in 2026, and then Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow and the Authority would be 2027. Again, this is all speculation, but I think Supergirl, the most concrete, would be 2027 based on what I said, because
Yeah.
I feel like that makes the most sense.
Yeah, and look, I'm gonna take a slightly more business approach to coming to this
Right.
answer, and that comes from the fact that look, if you cast Milly Alcock, who is in demand, like she is not somebody who is just sitting on her butt doing nothing. She is somebody who's got projects lined up, and she didn't just come into this franchise because nothing else was happening. I'm sure she's got a schedule that's full with, upcoming movies, TV shows, and whatever else she's taking part in. So, as part of her deal, I'm sure they probably had to figure out, like, all right, can we fit her into the production schedules that we have in mind? Now, I'm not saying they've already got like dates set for when Supergirl goes into production, but they probably have a general idea, and or like a certain set of months that they're gonna get, probably like, certain a commitment from Millie Alcock that you're gonna, be able to work with us in that time frame. And of course, we could probably say that it's a safe bet that her involvement in Superman Legacy is gonna be pretty brief, no matter what context she gets involved in. So she doesn't probably have to be on set for more than a few days, which I'm sure they can swing. Um, but given that they've cast her, and you're going with a young actress, and you want to maximize your return on your investment with the character, 2027 I think is a very reasonable time to see this movie. But I think it's possible that we might get it in 2026 because Welcome to Derry might take Andy Muschietti a while to get through, and
Yeah.
then we don't know what level of progress has been made on the script or the casting process. Because it's one thing that you don't have a director and you can kind of work on some of these elements. Like I'm like, Supergirl is the most ready to go into production movie, considering that you've got your lead actor, you've got your script and your writer, and you've kind of laid a lot of the key pieces in place. Yes, you're missing a director, and the director is going to hire probably the DP and all the other crew. But that stuff, it's once you get the ball rolling, that can happen pretty quickly. We have seen examples in the DCEU where Christina Hodson wrote the script and Andy Muschietti directed it. Andy Muschietti came on and they got the ball rolling pretty quickly, and the sets were being built. So like a lot, and some of that stuff could be happening before the deal is finalized with the director, as long as the director is like, yeah, I love this, like the script, we'll go with it, and doesn't want to like make tweaks, and unless, or if the tweaks are minor. So I would say that while 2027 is an is certainly probably the more realistic date, I would be willing to bet that unless Batman Brave and the Bold really picks up this year in terms of the progress it's making, um, Supergirl might go into production first. And if it's going into production first, it
That's
may be
fair.
coming out first. And 2026 would be a great time for it to come out because what other movie is farther along, in terms of being ready to go into like production? Like Super Swamp Thing, no. We talked about Batman Brave and the Bold. The Authority, I think, is a project
That has the
we
least
would be
amount
hearing.
attached to it, probably.
Yeah, like we should be hearing a lot more about it like than we have so far before that thing goes
Yeah,
into production.
that
And it's
might
also a
be
riskier project than Supergirl.
that
Like,
might be the cap. You know what? Quick thing. I know we keep saying we're going to
yeah.
end this soon, but just a quick thing. That I think the Authority would be a better ending of chapter 1 than the next movie after Superman Legacy, because obviously people are saying, "Oh, Superman Legacy is going to happen. The Authority is going to be a major thing in that," because obviously the engineer is cast and James Gunn has teased that. I think having it begin with Superman Legacy, having teases towards the Authority, have constant teases throughout all these movies, and then have chapter 1 end with the Authority, kind of have like a proper arc,
And
sort of like
speaking
the Authority
so
is that
far,
through line.
our chapter 1 is only part 1 of chapter 1. Like what they've
Right.
announced is not meant to be all of chapter 1 anyway. So for all like you could cuz I can imagine like you do that and it's sort of your Avengers Infinity War. So if you're not a big Marvel fan like anybody watching, I'm sorry, like we just keep drawing comparisons, but um
That's fair.
but like if you make that your first like setup to a payoff, that could be I think that payoff should be a Justice League movie. The Authority would be the perfect way to kind of like raise the stakes and like now here we go, this is where we're going with this, and eventually the Authority either has to be vanquished or in whatever shape or form they run up against the Justice League. Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic, but that's a great point because so far we really haven't heard about anything with the regards to a Justice
Outside
League
of the
movie.
engineer getting cast, but she's gonna
Yeah,
have a role in Superman Legacy. So, but
yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, and in the chat, it looks like people are suggesting 2026, which is a good it's a good number. Of course, we'll probably hear something different, like, or could hear something different in a few months, and be like, oh, look, Swamp Thing is going into production, and yeah, James Mangold is incredibly excited, and blah blah blah. Like things could be happening behind the scenes that we have no clue about. Usually, a lot of the news that breaks things have been done a long time before it comes out. Like sometimes people tend to think like, oh, they announced the whole Milly Alcock casting, and that means they must have just the ink might still be drying on the contracts. No, usually what happens is like these deals are signed, and then weeks later somebody gets told from an inside source, and then they put it out there.
Hmm.
Or at the very least days, if not like weeks. Like for example, when Ben Affleck was had made the decision to leave the role of Batman, like he had made that decision months before the first person to put that out there in the world that like did that, and that happens all the time. Like the casting for Lex Luthor with Nicholas Holt, that was done and dusted before the strikes happened, and people had been speculating he was in the short list, and one of the reasons why it wasn't made official and everything was not signed off was because of the strikes, but it was done like months before it became official. So yeah, I mean, some of this news trickles like she might have been cast in the role like late last year, because if they're going into production in March, they might have like they have to like build that into her schedule. Like she's not gonna. I mean, yeah, it's possible if she's only gonna be on set for a couple of days, they can cast her at the end of January and have her show up on set for a few days in March. But it's more likely that they probably made this decision a few weeks ago, and now we're hearing about it. Or the decision was made, but it wasn't like everything wasn't signed off until a few days ago, and that's when somebody got to break the story, and they because the fact that the story and the wrap and deadline literally came out at the exact same time on the same day tells me that the studios might have like given them like, all right, here you put it out there.
Right.
Um, and of course, the both articles, they took their different spins on the topic, but, they're reporting the same thing. So, yeah, with that in mind, I think that probably brings us to the end of the conversation for now. I'm sure we'll come
Right.
back to this topic again and again as we hear more about both Superman Legacy and Supergirl, The Woman of Tomorrow. Milly Alcock is an incredibly talented actress, and I think she's gonna do fantastically well with the
Most
character,
definitely.
as well as all the projects she's gonna be a part of. And I think Emilia Jones, as well as McDonnelly, have bright futures and possibly within the DCU. I know that Marvel, of course, is out there. You've got the Sony Spider-Verse. There's plenty of other opportunities if they wanna play some role in a superhero franchise. But Milly Alcock, moving from Game of Thrones on to DC, she's staying in the Warner Brothers, stable, and that's great for her, I'm sure, as well as for the DC universe, which the best thing you can do in any movie is add talent. Like, talent is always gonna, like, help your project do better. It may not work out, like, if the script isn't good, but, casting somebody who's talented, it could never be a bad thing. With that in mind, guys, let us know in the comments if you haven't already, like what you think about everything we have talked about. If you have questions, drop them in the comments. If you didn't get to them today, we'll get to them next time. We always take a note of them and we try to address them as best as we possibly can. And of course, in the comments, you can leave topic suggestions, ideas that you for future live episodes, as well as sometimes we do pre-taped special episodes, and we're looking for ideas for what topic would you like us to do some research on and do some analysis. We've got Creature Commandos coming out later this year, and then Joker Folie à Deux. We'll be covering that, and hopefully we'll be doing more of these live streams on a regular basis in the coming weeks and months. And until then, until the next big breaking news story comes out, keep checking back here, and we'll be talking DC, I'm sure, in the days, weeks, and months to come. It's been great talking to you, John. Thanks for joining
Of course.
me on the show today. And that's the story. Milly Alcock gets cast in the role of Supergirl for possibly Superman Legacy, and of course in her own movie, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. And until next time, guys, thanks for joining us in DCU Daily, and go out there and have a great week. We'll see you on the next episode.